afternoon everyone. Welcome to yet another lecture of Introduction to Networking, which is part of the web-based decision support system course for decision makers and practitioners. And this is this lecture, if you look into it, is to sort one of the major query about people is why this specific network, why this specific client server network architecture choice, why not something else. And we don't know much about networks. Can you explain a little bit more of the networks? So I thought I'll cover that part of this, and then the remaining aspects, how to build DSS models, etc. we will be done as part of the part 2 of this course. Okay. So today's lecture is Introduction to Networking, and we will try to make it as simple as possible in this lecture. So let's start with the two major aspects, networks and standalone computers. So if we look at what's a standalone computer, so standalone computer in the simplest sense, they uses programs and data only from its local disks, or it is internal storage. Can be hard disks, floppies, SSD, that is digital drives, etc., and is not connected to a network. Okay. So it is only able to do whatever the data that's available from the data is only available from the local disk. Whereas in a network, the simplest way to look into a network is it's a group of computers and other devices connected by some type of transmission media. So it is not just computers and some other devices, they are all connected with the help of some transmission media. There is some mechanism to transmit things. So what it does is it enables users. Users mean the people who use the network to share devices and data. Okay. The main thing is sharing, not the goal. Okay. The goal is not sharing in a standalone computer, whereas in network the main aim is to share devices and data, and this devices and data is normally known as network resources. So when somebody says I am using the network resource, literally means they are using either the device or the data or the both. Okay. So resources is device or data or both. So when somebody says I am using network resource, I am using this resource, that means it will either fall in a device or a data or both of them. So what we call as, let's talk about what something called as Sneakernet. Sneaker means you can think about shoes, okay, or you walk or something like that. So this is a standalone computer. This is also a standalone computer. The two standalone computers, and you are sharing the data from one computer to another by copying it into a disk and carrying the disk from computer to computer. So you copy here, copy, then carry, then save, and then other way also. So this process human needs to move between computers. The human being will move from one computer to another. That's what the reason why it's called a Sneakernet. Okay. So it's a human who does this transaction of the network. So this is how the data was shared before the networks were found. So we nickname it as Sneakernet because it is dependent on the sneaker or the shoes of the human being. Now there's other two terms that you need to remember. It's called local and remote computers, and this also is two words that we have used in the lecture frequently. So the simple way to do is, because you have asked me the question on what is a local host, etc. Okay, what is it? So the local computer is simplest way to think about is computer on which the user is working. So whenever I draw a computer like this, okay, this means a local computer. This implies it's the human being is working, the user is working on that computer. When we say a remote computer, the computer that the user controls or works via network connection. So you have a computer here, okay, I draw a user here and I have a so, and he has maybe a mobile phone or something and to use this. So, this is a small device, then there is a Wi-Fi or something or internet, and then it is connected to a remote computer. So, remote computer is when you require a network connection to work in a computer remotely. Then another thing that people asked me was, what is a peer-to-peer network? Why not, why just client server architecture? A peer-to-peer network, the easiest way to visualize it is a computer, there is a common cable on which each computer is connected with this. So, computers communicate on a single segment of cable. The main critical part is the single segment of cable. Single segment of cable, that is what we talk about. So, the single segment of cable and the resources sharing each other's data and devices, or the resources are shared using this single segment cable. So, here is this is some people called as a LAN, local area network. A simple example of this is a set of computers, integral desktop computers connected through a single segment of cable. So, such kind of network is called as a simple peer-to-peer network. So, when somebody says what is a peer-to-peer network, remember this diagram, you should be able to answer that question. Now comes the LAN, common name, local area network, LAN. What is a LAN? So, LAN is, to an extent, it also factors in the area covered under the network. So, it is a network of computers, local area network is a network of computers and other devices. So, it is a network, but it is confined to a relatively small space or relatively small area. Okay. So, relatively small area. Okay. This does not have to be space, but area is relatively small. So, LANs typically involve many computers and most of the time they are server based. So, server based means when you say there is a network is server based, when you say server based network, the idea is that there are some certain computers or special computers known as servers process the data and facilitate communication between other computers, okay, on the network, which are known as clients. Okay. So, you have a network where you have one computer, okay. This is a computer with its monitor, cables run between them and etc. This computer is the one that have connected to all of them, and there could be a it's a printer. Okay. So, this server basically integrates various computers and other devices like printer, scanner, fax, etc. And what it does is these special computers, which are known as the servers, they process the data and facilitate communication between other computers of the networks known as clients. So, the clients communicate to the server and the server facilitates the communication between the clients, share the data, process the resources, etc. And one of the reason why we choose, okay, why this course is on a server based architecture. Okay. The reason because is it is very difficult to manage so many clients. It is difficult to manage multiple clients individually. Okay. So, it is safer and easier to manage one server and have all the clients talk to the server and do what the server says. So, in a web based decision support system in a factory or in a big organization where there are thousands and thousands of employees are working, individually managing each computer, each client computer or each user computer is a very difficult task. So, hence it is better, easier, and for the purpose of maintaining uniformity across. It's easy to do everything in a server and let the people use the clients to communicate to the server. Okay. So, that is why we have used this server based architecture as part of it. But in the broad scheme of networks, server based architecture are also part of LAN. So, then another networking terms that you need to understand and you need to think about clearly is a term called workstation. The term that we talked about earlier was a standalone machine, okay, client server, and then also a word called workstation. The idea is that it's a computer that typically runs an desktop operating system. It's most of the time it's called as a desktop, it's not a laptop, and then it is connected to a network. A lot of the time it does not have too many, it's mostly doesn't have too much computation power. Many a times you don't have too much computation power, but its job is to basically connect to the network, okay, and talk to the server. The client server architecture, what we talked about in this course is it's a networking model in which clients use central server to share applications, devices and data. So, we have a central server in our case, okay, that has a DBMS, database management system. In this case it's MySQL MariaDB, okay. It has a web server. In our case this is Apache. It has a, we also have what we call as a application program. In our case that's a PHP, and Apache also provides 2 HTML capabilities as part of it, right. And we have not talked about sharing printers or scanners or etc., but the idea is that all these capabilities are stored, in our case is available on a central server, and the clients, the individual computers or the user specific computer, they all talk to the central server, and from where they share the applications, devices and data. Continuing on the network basics. So, the client server network. So, when somebody says it's a client server network, what it does, it means is on a client server, any network that is based on a client server architecture is called as a client server network, as simple as that. So, I am working on a client server network, that means I am working on a network that is designed under the client server architecture. Then there is another thing called network operating system. Okay. This is probably a new term, okay, and we have not discussed this in the class so far, but what it does is it's a special software. It is designed to manage data and other resources on a server for a number of clients. So, if you have one server managing multiple clients, you need certain software, okay, software that works with the operating system of the server. Okay. So, if the server has an operating system, then you need some software that will work with the operating system. What is its job? Helps to manage the clients. Okay. It will assist the server, the computer, to manage the number of clients, and manage the clients means by provide resources, keep track, etc. Okay. So, such kind of specific software is what we call as network operating system. So, this is what we call as a LAN with a file server. Okay. Here is an example of this. So, there is a main server. So, these are all you can think about as small desktops, okay, and this is a larger or higher capability computer or CPU. So, the server has a much larger capability and everybody is talking to the server. All these clients 1, 2, 3, 4 clients are talking to the server through a on a single connection. So, in this there is no storage, all the files are stored in the server. So, that is a file, the main job of the server is to store all the files there. So, here is an example of a LAN with a file server. Now, what is the advantage of a server based system over peer to peer networks? So, you may wonder that this diagram and this diagram kind of looks similar. So, what is the main difference, except that there is a one big server and everybody is talking to that. The main advantage is, what is the main advantage of server based systems? So, the user login accounts and passwords can be assigned in one place. So, there is a single place for user authentication. You can have a one individual machine, single machine, where the user accounts and passwords are assigned. So, all the credentials of the user are managed in one location. Then the second part is multiple shared resources can be centrally granted. Instead of granting, so let us say there is one printer and the printer resource need to be shared among either 10 computers, of which 4 need to be using the printer. So, instead of going to all the 4 and configuring it there, it is easier to do it in one place in the server and say workstation 1, 3, 5 and 7 will use the printer and nobody else can use the printer, and that is it. So, the one printer which is shared among, ideally supposed to be shared among all the 10 computers, you can give it we will give it to a subset of the 10 clients. So, this can be centrally done, and servers are most of the time are optimized to handle heavy processing loads and dedicated to handling requests from clients. So, the server systems, its operating system, its hardware, everything is designed and geared and tested towards and optimized, these are optimized also towards handle heavy processing loads, large computational requests, and dedicated to handling requests from clients. So, when multiple client requests comes in, server can assign different resources to different clients to make sure that the work actually gets done properly. So, in this regard, servers are optimized to do this than individual desktops, and servers can connect more than a handful of computers. The biggest disadvantage of a peer to peer network is you can typically connect only 5, 10, very limited number of computers, not more than that. Whereas servers can typically connect 5, 6, beyond 6, beyond 10, it is very difficult to actually manage a peer to peer network. But the servers can connect more than a handful of computers, they can 100, couple hundred, even couple thousand things can be done as part of the network. Then there is something called MAN and WAN. This is another term that somebody asked, what is this WAN? Wide area network. So, there are new terms that came up as soon as the size and area of the network. So, with respect to size and area of the network, these things will change. So, the MAN stands for Metropolitan Area Network, right. The idea of a Metropolitan Area Network is, network is connecting clients and servers in multiple buildings within limited geographical area. So, you may have like in a tech park or something where there is 4 or 5 different buildings and all the computers in that buildings are connected to one network. So, that typically that kind of an architecture is called as a MAN, metropolitan area. It is in multiple servers and clients are in multiple buildings and they are all connected, but within limited geographic area, that is a critical component. Whereas, on converse side, the wide area network, which is also known as WAN. So, the wide area network is network that spans large distance and connect 2 or more LANs. So, multiple LANs, you can think about it in a different way. You can have a server here, you have so the server is connected to all these networks, and then there is this is let us say in a one building, and there is another building in which there is another server where you have they are also connected in another building. So, this is building 1, building 2. These buildings are let us say 200 meter apart, So, this will become what you call as a man, be metropolitan area. Whereas, let us say this is in India, and there is another one like this. In a building you have here is two networks, here is another build one, there is a server and there is only one client, and let us say this is in Spain or something like that. These two can be called as a WAN. So, classic example of a WAN is internet. Okay. Internet is all across the globe. Okay. It is a WAN, extensive WAN that spans the globe. So, the idea of a WAN is it is not geographically limited, whereas MAN is geographically limited. Okay. So, that is the difference between MAN and WAN. And then certain elements that are common to all server based networks. We need to understand what some of the elements, some of the words or some of the technologies that is common to almost all of them. Number one is client. We already discussed what. In addition to referring to a computer on the network, it may also refer to the human user of the client workstation. So, the client in the word can mean two things: a computer on the network, or a desktop computer, dedicated computer, lower level computer available, can be a human using the computer on network. It can also be both as well. So, the client has typically two meanings. Most of the time it means the computer on the network, but certain times it also means or intends to the user of the client workstation. And server, we saw what it is. It is already we said it is a high power computer which actually manages the, so it manages resources. Resources is devices and data of a network. And we saw what a workstation is. Workstation is a computer that typically runs a desktop operating system. So, computer with limited capabilities operating a desktop OS, okay, operating system. Then there is something called NIC, network interface card. Okay. Many of the time you hear this term NIC. It is not the National Informatics Center, that is something else. This is network interface card. So, what it does is this enables the workstation to connect to the network and communicate with other computers. So, the NIC, the network interface card, is the intermediary in between the workstation which will communicate to the network. So, the workstation requires a network interface card to communicate with the network, and in that process it can communicate with the other computers in the network. So, how does a network interface card looks like? So, if you look into this, it can be, this is a coaxial connection. It is very rare now. Early days it used to be very popular. This is the telephone line, okay, the dial-up network, old school. You can also have currently we have the Ethernet, the Cat5 cable. You can have another connection for Cat5 or what you call as the Ethernet cable. So, then there is something what we talked about, what is a network operating system. It is a software that works along with the server operating system. Intended to assist the server in managing network resources. The intention here is to manage the network resources as part of it. So, the two terms again this term also occurs very commonly, host and node. So, you have seen another word in some of the script. You said what is host name. Okay. So, the host means the server that manages the shared resources. So, the host name is equivalent to server name. Okay. So, host is a server that typically manages the resources, and node means it can be a client, it can be server or other device that can communicate over a network, and that is identified by a unique identifying number known as its network address. Node does not distinguish whether you are a device, whether you are a server, whether you are a desktop, whether you are a client, etc. It does not matter. It can be a client, it can be a server or any other device. The main aim is you have to be connected to a network, you can communicate over a network, and you should have a unique identifying number within that network. Is known as its network address. So, if you have an individual unique network identifying number and you can communicate over a network, so then you become a node. Node does not distinguish whether it is a. So, node term does not distinguish whether it is a server, client, desktop, device, etc. Okay. So, it is just something that is connected to the network with a unique address. So, then somebody says a thing called topology, and the topology in a simplest word is, again somebody was asking this question, the physical layout of a computer network, and we are not going to get into too much of this, but these are the main you can think about this. One is a bus network. Bus network means there is a single line on which things are connected to, each computers communicate over a single connection line. Then second one is a ring. You can think about it as a circular communication channel on which individual computers communicate through this circular bus, okay, or ring bus. Okay. Then the star connection is you need a network, you need a device in between, something like an Ethernet port or a switch or something, on which computers are connected to this switch, and then this switch manages the interconnections in between. And a hybrid is a connection of any of these things put together, will give you what you call as a hybrid network. So, the commonly used network topologies, the bus, ring, star and hybrid, and topology literally means how the network is physically laid out. And then there is two more other things that you heard, the protocol and the data packets. Okay, I think I used the word data packets couple times in the lecture. So, the protocol, when somebody says I am using some specific, these are all common to all server based networks. Okay. So, somebody says I am using a TCP IP protocol or this protocol or UDP protocol or whatever it is. All the protocol implies is these are the rules the network uses to transfer the data. Okay. So, how the data is transferred from one computer to another, whether the client to the server or server to the client or server to the printer, it does not matter. How the data is transferred from one node to another in the network, it is determined by the protocol that the network follows, and that is called a protocol. Then the second one is data packets. So, what is data packets? The distinct units of data transmitted from one computer to another on a network. So, two computers are connected on a network, and the distinct units of data that is transferred between these two computers from one network to another is what we call as a data packet. Then another element common to the server based networking is addressing. So, what is addressing? So, addressing is the scheme. It is a scheme for assigning unique identifying number to every workstation on the network. So, you want to identify a particular workstation in a network, and you need to, for that you need to assign a unique identifying number, some unique number through which you can definitely identify that workstation. So, that is called as the addressing. The addressing mechanism is the process of assigning, the scheme of assigning the unique identifying number. So, this number that uniquely identifies each workstation and device on a network is known as its address. So, when somebody says IP address or something like that, address, that word address, okay, the IP address or something, okay, this word address is the unique identification number of the node in the network. Okay. Can be a client, it can be a server, it can be a printer, doesn't matter. Okay. That address is the unique identification number of that. So, there is some other things which is common to all of them, and you need to remember this, okay, common to all network based systems. Transmission media, okay, or transmission medium, whatever people call it, right. So, the infrastructure, it actually means the infrastructure or the means through which the data are transmitted and received. What are the different approaches? There are so many options to this. I am not going to give you too many details, going to give you simple example. The coaxial cable, as I showed you earlier, it is no longer very popular, but it is earlier days, it is popular in earlier days. Okay. Shielded twisted pair cable. So, this is also sometimes we can call it as CAT, most of the time people call it as Cat5 cable or something like that. So, that is a twisted pair in that regard. Then fiber optics, FOG, somebody says FO, fiber optics cable. So, this is where it actually you can transmit very large, this is latest large volume data transmission, very expensive. This is low volume data, it is cheap. Okay. You can think about it that way. Then computers can also transfer data or information through infrared, like you can see most of the time. The easiest example of this is remote controls, TV remotes. Okay. You point at the TV and click it, it has actually an infrared which actually can do it. Then you can have a microwave or tower, which is through which you have your mobile communications, etc., are part of this example, right. And these are without any wire, you can communicate through radio signals or radio frequencies. Now, how are networks used? And the main aspect of it in this case is services. So, networks, as I said earlier, it provides multiple services to the users. The main services are the file and print services, you can share the file, print documents, etc., communication services, mail services, internet services, and management services. These are the commonly used services as part of the network. So, the network services, now let us go through each one of these one by one, right. So, the file services, okay, one of the major network services is file services. If you see into this, file and print services is one, right. So, what does it when somebody says I am using the file server or file services, it means it is the capability of the server to share data files, application, and disk storage space. So, the server, the computer that provides the file services is known as a file server. So, a file server has the capability to provide, it can provide share data files, share applications, share disk space or storage space. Okay. So, these kind of capabilities, mostly these three capabilities are what you call as the services provided by a file server. So, the file services, when somebody says I am using a file server, that means the person is either sharing the data or sharing the application or basically sharing the disk space or storage space. Second is the print services. Okay. Print services means printers, okay, to be shared by several users on a network. Okay. So, the server that actually allows for sharing the printer is called as, sometimes called as a print server. Okay. So, it is printers can be shared on the network. Then the second one that we talk about is the communication services as part of this. Okay. What are the major communication services provided? So, the main aspect is allow remote users to connect to a network. Okay. We told what is a remote user and what is a network. So, how a remote user is connected to the network. Okay. So, what is a remote user? Again, person working on a computer in a different geographical location from the LAN server. So, you have a LAN server, LAN as told is geographically restricted area, network within that, and the person is working on a computer in the LAN from a different location using another computer. So, that is called as a remote user. Okay. The communication server, the term communication server. So, the server or the computer that runs the communication services is known as the communication server. It is also known as access servers or remote access servers. When somebody says I am using the access server or remote access server or a communication server, all of them means the same. The person is interacting with a computer in a different which is in a different geographical location than that of the LAN server, and they are using a communication server or access server or remote access server to do this work. Now comes the mail services. So, we all know what is an email. Okay. So, that is also a critical aspect of a network. So, the mail services, it includes coordinating the storage and transfer of email between users on the network. Okay. So, in IITK, everybody who is a member of the IITK network, they all get an IITK email at @iitk.ac.in, and that is provided by a mail server that is in our computer center, right. So, the mail server stores and transfers email between users in a network. Then here is another term that you need to remember. Sometimes you will say gateway, you will hear this term gateway. So, the word gateway intends it is a combination of a software and hardware enabling two different networks to exchange data. So, sometimes there is some form of a combination of a software and a hardware that will allow two different kinds of network to exchange data. Can be two different topologies, two different geographically located networks. So, the gateway is something that will allow these networks to two different networks to communicate. Okay. Then what we call as the internet services. Okay. So, the internet services is something that enables networks to communicate with the internet, that is called as the internet services. Then there is the last one is called a management services, and there is a lot of things that comes under the management services, and many of them are important to us. So, we will discuss some of those aspects quickly, so that you have a broader idea of things. Okay. So, the management services that are administered centrally or somebody does all of this centrally, and it is to simplify the complicated management tasks on the network. So, the idea is to avoid managing services on individual clients. So, if you have 1000 computers, there is no point in going to all the 1000 computers and doing it. Instead of that, do it centrally. Okay. So, that is the management services, and thus numerous services fall under this category of management services, many of them. So, we are only going to look into the important ones, we are not going to look into the other ones. So, important management services, traffic monitoring and control. Okay. This is one important aspect of the management service. So, when said net traffic, it is not the raw traffic, it is the data traffic. Okay. So, the data transmission and processing activity taking place on a computer network at any given time. Okay. So, traffic management means to make sure that everybody can communicate data to the server or within themselves without choking the because every network interconnection, whether it is a coaxial cable or a twisted pair or fiber optics, there is a limit to of how much data can be transmitted. So, how to manage that so that data transmission never gets choked and the network continues to function smoothly, that is part of the traffic monitoring and control. Then there is something called as a segment, okay, another term that you will come across, and segment is ideally is a part of the LAN, okay, that is logically separated from the other parts of LAN, that shares fixed amount of traffic capability or capacity. So, certain times you would say I want this particular few section of it to be geographically located separately, or it can be separated not just geographically, some logic. Okay. We are kind of keeping these computers separate out and they have a fixed amount of traffic capacity, we do not want them to deal with other things. So, those kind of things is called as a network segment. Many a time segments are used to manage computers that is meant for dedication. So, somebody, let us say that you have a large network in an office and a small set of computers are there to just do video editing. So, then you can say that okay, they are going to do video editing and they are going to transmit large files and nothing else. So, they are interconnected, they are provided, they are part of this particular segment of the network, and this is their data connection capability, and that is it. Okay. So, but they are originally part of the entire IITK network, but they are also a small segment of it. Then another management services is load balancing, and load balancing is an important service purely because of the aim here is that what it does is it distributes the processing activity, okay, evenly across the network, so that no single device is overwhelmed. So, let us say you want to do so many things using the network. So, the load balancing says, okay, I have this much of computation to do and I have 20 nodes. So, instead of giving all of this job to one computer, it will distribute it among the 20 computers, so that no one resource is overwhelmed as in the within the network. And hardware diagnostics and failure alert is another aspect, which means when you have multiple components in a network, you need to know whether everything is connected, working, or something is bad. So, what it does is it determines on a network whether the component has failed and automatically notifying the network administrator through email or pager. So, it says, okay, this particular desktop or particular node is no longer communicated to us. So, either the network cable has gone bad or the computer itself is gone bad. So, that type of information given to the network administrator. And then comes the asset management and license tracking. Okay, so asset management means it's the collecting and storing data on a number and types of software and hardware in an organizational network. So, let us say you have this particular type of servers, this many desktop, this many licenses of a software, this much of database management system, etc., etc., etc. All this many printers, this many scanners, this many fax machines, all those stuff, details of software and hardware, okay, of assets in the organization networks. It could be a LAN, it could be a WAN, it could be a MAN, it could be star, bus, whatever it is, okay. Topologies, it does not matter how you do that. Whatever be the organization network, this hardware and software, the types of them and the details of it, that is kept centrally and then managed. That is called the asset management. Then the other one is the license tracking, determining how many copies of a single application are currently in use in a network. So, many of the software has a particular thing called license associated with it, and these software licenses are expensive and are paid for, and hence you need to find out how many licenses are being used. So, let us say somebody has created a license of a analytic MATLAB license, and there is only 15 licenses available. So, we need to know how many users are using it, and at any point of time 15 users is finished, the 16th person who want to use MATLAB will be told the maximum number of users are reached, and hence you please wait until somebody stops using MATLAB. Okay. So, that service is also part of the license tracking. And the last but not the least, you have security auditing and software distribution. Okay. So, security auditing means the security measures that are enforced in the network, okay, and whether there is any security breach that occurs, whether we talk about terms like firewall, okay, or we call it as there is two types, software and hardware firewalls. Okay. Then you can also call us data breach or breaches or attacks, cyber attacks, etc. All these kind of things. Okay. Those stuff are all managing hacking attempts, etc. are all part of this security auditing. Whereas software distribution is automatically transferring data file or program from the server to a client network. So, let us say there is somebody who wants to run a MATLAB on a client machine. So, say I want to run MATLAB. So, then the MATLAB files gets transferred to that server, not to the server, to the client, and the client runs the MATLAB and everything. Once it is done, the files and everything gets sent back to the client as part of finally after that. And then the other one is we want to talk about is the address management. Okay. I told you what is an address. Okay. Address means it is each asset of the network, that's or each computer or each node on the network or the LAN has a unique number through which you can address it, and how to manage that, centrally administer that finite number of addresses that are available for a LAN is what we call as the address management. Okay. And then the backup and restoration of data. Okay. Many a times your data is also very critical, so you need to back up data. Backup data means copying critical files to a secure storage area. So, it is creating, so you have certain secure files in a computer and you are copying that and keeping it in a secure location, that is called as the backing up. And restoring means at some point of time, okay, a file is deleted or retrieved, lost, then you can go to the backup and retrieve the data that is lost or deleted from the client and bring it back to the from the backup location. Okay. All these are important management services. Okay. So, I just only covered few management services. So, the reason you go with a client server architecture is all of the the server architecture allow us to do all these things in a centrally administered fashion. So, as long as you can manage the server, the things actually is much more easy. So, when you have very large organization, let us say take Infosys or TCS or something which has worldwide presence, it is easier and better to go with the server based decision support system or server based approach in handling these things than going through something else. Okay. So, with that we come to the end of this lecture, and I think we have this course of helped you and understand the basics of web based decision support system, why we follow this client server architecture, the DBMS and etc. and stuff like that. We also have looked into what we call as the big data and why it is called big data and what some of the fallacies of big data and stuff like that. And then Professor Amandeep Singh has taught you other aspects of it. Hope you all had a fun time learning this course, and the part 2 of this course we will deal with advanced modeling and other aspects of the course using more complicated aspects like Python, etc. Thank you very much for your patient listening. Thank you.